Been a while since I've done one of these. Back in 2020 with the rise of COVID, I thought it necessary to watch and review all of the Transformers films since they were a real staple in my childhood, starting with 2007's Transformers, and I'd seen them all in the theaters. So I reviewed Transformers 1 through 5 by Michael Bay, as well as Bumblebee, a film by Travis Knight, in my series at the time, Why It Sucked, which has been retrofitted into a more general retrospective series. And since my thumbnails have always been the same for the rest of the series, I think the Michael Bay movies kind of suck, so I decided to call this Why It Sucks, and I'm going to continue that tradition, hence the thumbnail for this one. The most wild part of the Transformers series is that despite the amount of films made, the first 5 mainline films were all done by Michael Bay. Bumblebee was a pretty different film, and as such separated it from Bay's style a bit. But this is the first mainline Transformers, however, not to be directed by Michael Bay. And while Bay's fingerprints are all over it, for example the tone, the look, the feel, the returning bots like Bumblebee and Optimus, it doesn't seem to really tie itself to that continuity too much. Anyhow, enough time has passed since the release of this film. I think it's finally time to continue my series of retrospectives and add this to my playlist. If you're interested in watching me talk about each of the other live-action Transformers films, go ahead and take a look at my playlists. Regardless, I'm going to be trying to catch up on some of the franchises I've reviewed since they've since gotten sequels since I finished them. Things I want to get around to reviewing finally include No Time to Die, since I have one Turbo video where I review every other James Bond film. Friday the 13th was my Halloween project in 2017, which I still work on from time to time, like one video every year or two. But hey, I didn't say which Halloween it would be finished by, so if I can get the one a year average, maybe eventually I'll get it done in like 15 years. Production for this film started back after Bumblebee, but the studio kind of wanted to figure out where to go with the franchise. Bumblebee was a different beast from Michael Bay's films, and while the studio considered bringing Travis Knight on, he wanted to move on from the franchise, ultimately just doing Bumblebee since he had a concept for that film. James Vanderbilt and Joby Harold both worked on scripts. James Vanderbilt known for Zodiac, which is amazing, and also The Amazing Spider-Man. So he has a weirdly huge mixed bag filmography, but anyways, ultimately, they went with Joby's script. He's also known for writing The Flash, which also came out the same year, so he's relatively prolific these days apparently, even though I never heard of him. Soon after the movie was announced, it was revealed we would see some characters from Beast Wars. This includes the Maximals and the Predacons, though only one Predacon actually appeared in this film. The team behind this film also confirmed this was supposed to be the start of a pre-Transformers 2007 arc for Optimus Prime, which do we need a pre-Transformers 2007 arc for Optimus Prime? The dude acts like a psycho in the Michael Bay movies, so doesn't seem like he must have learned much in this film, but whatever. I mean, the continuity doesn't seem to be headed in the direction of Optimus Prime actually having a significant story arc. Also, Transformers 2007 pretty strongly implies this was Optimus Prime's first time on Earth. The continuity doesn't seem to be headed in that direction, really, that Optimus Prime goes through a major arc. But regardless, it doesn't really matter. These movies are kind of like the X-Men prequels that came out later, where they just set them vaguely in the past and it doesn't really make sense with the actual timeline of the original movies. But this movie didn't even bother rebooting. They're just like, this is what it is. Anyways, on to the story. Noah Diaz is a down-on-his-luck former member of the military who's working to find a job to help pay for his brother Chris's sickle cell disease. Noah ends up turning to a life of petty crime, but this eventually causes him to cross paths with Mirage and the rest of the Autobots, who are on Earth looking for a MacGuffin, the Transwarp Key, and are hoping to find it before the Terracons. But, as it turns out, Elena Wallace, a museum intern, has the key in her possession, and she gets pulled into the adventure after Noah attempts to steal the key from the museum. The team meets the Predacons and they fight for the first time, and Bumblebee is written out of the movie by being critically injured. They head to Peru to try to get another key, I guess, and there they meet the Maximals, and the team eventually gets in their final battle with the Terracons, who hope to use the key to awaken Unicron and destroy the Earth, while the Autobots are hoping to get the key to return to Cybertron. Transformers: Rise of the Beasts has numerous characters that were added, and since this is a thing I do in my more recent retrospectives, and I like to talk more about the wider lore of characters, let's do it for this film, despite being new to the format from the original set of videos. Optimus Prime, as portrayed by Peter Cullen, has been the leader of the Autobots in virtually every iteration of the franchise, first appearing in Generation 1, starting in the comics, and continuing to the show and films later on. Optimus transformed into a semi-truck in most iterations, and that part of his character returns here. Mirage is kind of the lead Transformer in this film, taking over for Bumblebee, as Bumblebee's critically injured throughout the film. He's Optimus's right-hand man in this film and works closely with the human protagonists. Mirage is another G1 Autobot, and was a member of the original team of Autobots that landed in the first episode and was pretty integral to that run of the series.
I'll say hello to Prime for you, Megatron. Happy landing! Stop it!
In Transformers Armada, he was a Decepticon, but most versions of the series he was just an Autobot. He appeared in the background of Transformers Dark of the Moon, but was also called Dino as like a nickname. So at least there's something of a continuity reason for the new version of Mirage, as I guess they're two different robots, but I just think this continuity's messy. Bumblebee first appeared as a major character in G1, being Spike's main Autobot companion, but in the coming versions wouldn't even be that important. It wasn't really till the 2007 movie repopularized the character that Bumblebee sort of became important again. Originally a Volkswagen Beetle, Bumblebee would be stylized as a Camaro in most of the films. In the cartoon, he's chatty, but in the films, he talks through the radio and is mostly silent for most of the films. In this one, he gets shot and gets put in a fucking coma. RC became a popular character in Transformers G1 following the film and would show up in a few subsequent shows before making her live-action film debut in Transformers Revenge of the Fallen with her two sisters. This film's RC is much more akin to the classic iteration than the Revenge of the Fallen version. This is another kink in the armor of these films being legitimately canon to the Bayverse films, since why do they not look or act similar to the Bayverse films? This is the second returning character who was later recycled. Wheeljack is in this film too. He's another G1 character that would primarily be a character in the show. In Transformers Armada, he'd be an Autobot that joined the Decepticons. Again, Wheeljack has another movie version from Dark of the Moon. That version was an old man scientist. The Dark of the Moon version is more akin to the original, with Wheeljack always doing weird inventions and stuff in G1. With the Rise of the Beasts, they made him a weird French guy who just happened to be named Wheeljack. Again, this adds to the whole not canon in the Bayverse thing. Whatever though. Stratosphere is an original-ish character to the film. The character was originally a toy for Revenge of the Fallen's toy line, and was wholly original before being included in the Dark of the Moon video game in his first true appearance outside of film. I mean, most Transformers characters start as toys, but it's very unusual with the literal thousands of Transformers for there to be like no basis in any sort of cartoon or other media besides the fact that somebody just thought he was a cool toy in Revenge of the Fallen, and then somebody's like, I guess he's in my video game now, and then later on they said, I guess he's in our movie now. Those were the Autobots, but there's a string of Maximals as well, which are basically the Beast Wars equivalent of Autobots. Optimus Primal is a Beast Wars character that is clearly just Optimus Prime, but this time he transforms into a gorilla instead of a semi-truck. Anyways, this film kind of hand-waves that away with a line.
Optimus Primal? Named after you, the legendary warrior of Cybertron.
The character was the leader of the Maximals in Transformers Beast Wars, which was a very 90s reinvention of the Transformers franchise. Airazor does the recon for the Beasts in the original Beast Wars cartoons, before transitioning into the kind of Mother Goose for the Maximals in this film. She turns into a hawk and loves Earth a lot for some reason. Whatever. Cheetor is kind of the hot rod of the Beast Wars universe, being sort of a charismatic young member of the Maximals. In the film, he's kind of a background character, but is an interesting addition, I suppose. Rhinox is another primary Beast Wars character, and is an important player in that universe. He turns into a rhino. Ape Link in the film is Optimus Primal's mentor, and he dies to help him escape. He originated in the Beast Machine era comics, and was one of the characters in the Beast Wars continuity to cross over with some G1 characters, since they technically share continuity for some reason. The Maximals seemed pretty easy and less messy to adapt, because the filmmakers could just pull who they wanted and put them in these films as they choose. With the Autobots, it seems Hasbro and Paramount didn't care what characters were picked, but wanted to maintain the feel of Optimus and Bumblebee from the Bayverse. This continuity is weird, but since Beast Wars and Beast Machines era characters never got touched, it was easy for them to do whatever with them and not wonder why we now have 2 versions of Wheeljack, 2 versions of Mirage, and 2 versions of RC running around this universe. In terms of the Terracons, there are no Decepticons. The big bad was Scourge, who plays the main villain. In the G1 continuity, he plays a side role where he's Galvatron's third in command, Galvatron being the reincarnated Megatron.
Scourge, the tracker, and his huntsman, the sweeps.
Anyway, he's decently cool as a villain, and certainly has more to do here than he does in the G1 cartoons. Nightbird is based mostly on her Cyberverse version of the character. In G1, she's like a ninja thing created by a scientist and stolen by the Decepticons. In Cyberverse, she's basically just an evil version of RC, so I think that's kind of what they wanted to go for with this take. Battletrap first appeared in G1 as a toy, then a comics character, before eventually making his debut in the Japanese TV series. Since Japan had a few seasons of Transformers after the American show ended for some reason. Anyways, he also showed up in Cyberverse briefly, but was never a major character or anything until being adapted for this film. Novocaine and Freezer are a pair of original characters that are reminiscent of Frenzy from the original 2007 Transformers film, another tied to the Bayverse, and yet the continuity is just wildly confusing. Speaking of, Scorponok is the final Terracon and is reminiscent of the Scorponok from the original film, but it seems like this is just a subspecies in this film series. Anyhow, Scorponok was awesome in G1. He was a giant fortress transformer, a la Fortress Maximus. In Beast Wars, he's more akin to what Michael Bay had in mind for the character, however. Agent Berkey seems to be an original character for this film, but he is a recruiter for the G.I. Joes.
Your mom had an accident. I'll take you to her.
Which seemed to be having a tie-in film as some part of shared Hasbro toy-based shared universe, crossover, cinematic universe shit. So he's somewhat notable, and it seems we might be getting a third iteration of G.I. Joe in film with this soft reboot of Transformers. It's been noted that Berkey may be a codename and that he might be a legacy character, but only time will tell, assuming Paramount and Hasbro's plans for this shared universe will follow through with this character. Finally, we have Unicron, who we don't wholly see, but the Predacons are trying to summon him. He originated in Transformers the animated film from the 1980s, and he's kind of like Transformers' version of Galactus. He's a transforming evil planet thing. He's kind of cool. Anyways, let's talk about the character arcs more in detail now that we talked about all the characters and where they were adapted from. Noah Diaz is hoping to help his brother who has sickle cell disease, but is down on his luck when it comes to work and turns his life to petty crime, which pulls him into the Autobot conspiracy when he accidentally tries to steal Mirage. He ends up helping to save the world and everything's good at the end. Anthony Ramos is decent, and the fact that he isn't a psycho like Mark Wahlberg's character or an overly horny character like Shia LaBeouf's character, and they actually make him feel like a real protagonist is moderately shocking for this series. Is he super deep or anything? Not really, but they tried to make a real protagonist, and I guess they somewhat succeeded, even if his character was perhaps a tad boring. Optimus Prime is a psycho in this film. I don't know why the live-action movies do this so much. Plus, he just whines a lot about everything. about wanting to go back to Cybertron, and basically hates humans. Pretty much everything that Optimus Prime isn't about.
Take back Scourge's key, and then take off his head.
I just think perhaps make Optimus conflicted about going back to Cybertron, but wanting to also help this planet that is threatened by the Terracons, Optimus Prime would do. But for some reason he's a fucking psycho.
I will end you, Scourge. I can think of no better place to bury you.
Bumblebee is, for some reason, in this film, and is, for some reason, basically written out of the film. And my theory is, so he doesn't steal the spotlight from Mirage, who I think they definitely wanted to position as the third major Autobot. After all, before Transformers 2007, Bumblebee was only a major character in G1. Having another major character would help the trilogy stand apart and expand merchandising opportunities, which is ultimately what the franchise's purpose is, to sell toys and merchandise. Mirage is played by Pete Davidson, or Skeet Davidson, as us big-brained individuals call him.
That heroin addict away from my kids that was tattooing my kids' names on them, Skeet, Pete Davidson.
And is the newest Transformer. While the Revenge of the Fallen version had a small role, Mirage had a big role here. It makes sense they'd pick Mirage, as he's a pretty notable character in the first G1 show, and was barely touched in Michael Bay's iteration. On top of that, he can transform into cool cars, and Pete Davidson is a memorable star, like him or not, so it makes sense that they had him as a character and kind of positioned him to be a major long-term Transformers character again. He also had some levity that, unlike Michael Bay's Transformer films, rarely gets disturbingly raunchy, although occasionally it does.
Mojo, no dominating Frankie! Get the hell off the couch, you filthy...
Optimus Primal is portrayed by Ron Perlman and is another major addition to the cast. Optimus Primal was the equivalent of Optimus Prime in Beast Wars and is a similarly brave warrior and great leader that values life and stuff. At one point, he calls out Optimus about his lack of reverence for humans. Primal is a solid character. It's a bit weird they didn't consider renaming him, since his entire personality and looks makes him look just like an Optimus Prime clone, and that idea works a bit better when he isn't confusingly starring opposite the original Optimus Prime, but regardless. Scourge is basically this movie's Megatron, and while I respect not ass-pulling Megatron again, I mean, Scourge is basically just Megatron. He wants to revive Unicron and bring him out of Earth or whatever. He's really evil. I don't know. The villains aren't that deep in these Transformers movies, it doesn't really matter. Tonally, this movie is in line with the Michael Bay films, but the characters feel more like real characters than the characters from the Michael Bay universe. Less forced cringe humor, like humping chihuahuas or droning shots on a freshly 18-year-old Megan Fox that makes me puke in my mouth. In fact, this movie isn't horribly perverted, which is nice. Plus, it's occasionally funny and has some cute moments. There's some odd stuff, like when Noah makes Mirage an Iron Man suit. For the most part, the tone plays it pretty seriously and understands and respects the odd world of Transformers. Music for this film was done by Jorgnik Bontemps, who did a hip-hop heavy soundtrack that also featured some new twists on some of Michael Bay era scores, along with the Unicron song from the original animated film. In terms of licensed song, it's very New York rap heavy, with tracks from the Wu-Tang Clan, A Tribe Called Quest, Nas, Biggie, LL Cool J, and more, giving the 80s and 90s vibe, rather than going with contemporary hip-hop, which would feel a little weird in this movie, which is for some reason set in 1994. It's occasionally cool, but kind of an odd choice for the film. The new Ninja Turtles film also used a similar soundtrack technique with its licensed rap music technique with its soundtrack, and came out just a couple weeks after this film, and was also released by Paramount. My guess on why they did this is because films like Spider-Verse and Fast and the Furious made hip-hop melody soundtracks cheap, and people like catchy hip-hop songs. Also, licensing a Tribe Called Quest song is probably easier and cheaper than assembling an orchestra and a composer to create original tracks for the film, and then basically just hoping they come out good. It's another trend in film music that's used to lower costs. It's not much different than what happened in the wake of James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, where every film became a jukebox musical with top 40 songs from the past 7 decades scoring the film. It feels kind of weird in this film that takes place in the Peru jungle for 2/3 of the film and works a lot less well than something like a trippy urban Spider-Verse movie or even the aforementioned Ninja Turtles, which is at least like New York focused and kind of hip-hoppy and street and running around doing ninja shit. This is a bunch of fucking Transformers robots and it takes place in New York for like 10 fucking minutes and they're playing Biggie Smalls in Peru. It's fucking weird. The film was edited primarily by William Goldenberg, who notably worked with Michael Bay on Transformers 3 and 4, along with a lot of films in a similar vein to these from an editing perspective, like Miami Vice from Michael Mann. He did a nice job. He can edit together a coherent fight scene, which I must also give a little credit to the writers and director, Stephen Capel, as well, because when it comes down to brass tacks, that if you can't shoot a good robo fight, then there's not much to edit together to do well on. And let's be honest, in Transformers films, shooting a fight scene and editing a fight scene is more important than the writer's job, because the story in these films don't fucking matter at all. You could write the most exquisite dialogue in the world, but 99% of the people could give a shit less and just want to see robots punch and shoot each other, which this film does a good job of putting together occasionally. Another integral part of filmmaking is cinematography. For Transformers Rise of the Beasts, that was handled by Enrique Chedek, who worked on tons of films. Most notable for this film is Bumblebee, which, yes, much like Bumblebee, it's very serviceable. It's certainly more serviceable than the first 2 ugly-ass Transformers films, but it definitely doesn't actually do much at all creative when making the film. Where, love them or hate them, Michael Bay's Transformers were pretty creative visually. The film kind of just emulates the Marvel brand, vibrant but flat, ideal for CG-heavy films, and makes it quick and look serviceable. For me as a film nerd, I like to see some cool shit captured on a camera that wasn't just added in later by a computer. The camera in this film doesn't do much more than shoot the movie. Like, there's nothing creative behind it. It's like, oh, set up angle number 1, wide angle so that we can get plenty of CGI packed into this shot, close up on Noah talking to people. It's fucking boring. One thing I enjoy a lot about this film is the design work of all the characters. Grab their vibes from the G1 show, and the 1994 settings allows some unique cars, and then smash it together with the vibes the Bayverse was going for, and you got something that looks a little better than some of those over-designed robots from the Michael Bay movies. On top of that, Optimus Primal and Mirage were pretty well established and are decent new Transformers, but the flip side of that is that every other Transformers is just kind of in the background. Bumblebee is critically injured for much of the film, making him pretty much pointless, except to be there to put him in a couple new cars so that they can sell new toys. They didn't really have anything to do with him, so why even bother putting him in the script? The only reason anybody would be sad that Bumblebee was injured and that he needs to be dragged around for the whole movie is because we're predisposed to know this is already Bumblebee, the big Transformers guy who was so important in the other 6 movies. I don't really understand why this movie is just like, Bumblebee's shot, write him out. And Scourge is just kind of Megatron again. And the only Maximal besides Primal that actually does anything is Airraiser, and all she really does is say some wise shit and then get shot. Transformers 1 and 4 suck, but are probably the 2 most successful at creating an ensemble cast with the Transformers robots, and the characters play a big part in the film. Also, does everything need to be a cinematic universe? Adding the G.I. Joe sounds much more like a good idea on paper than as an actual plot point that makes sense. And I feel like with how bad the Joe and Transformers films have been at establishing characters, packing in more undefined one-note characters into these films with even more factions, because I'm sure we're going to see Cobra and the G.I. Joes and whatever else, and the fucking Predacons, the Decepticons, the Autobots. It's a recipe for the upcoming sequels to this film to be incredibly bloated. And that's if they stop there. Hasbro has a lot of properties, and they've been talking about mashing them all together for years now, so this is our first taste at it. Overall, meh. It's not the worst film in the series, but it definitely is the most generic. It copies Bay while stripping the film of Bay's trademark things, like statutory rape explanations.
Statute 2705-3.
What? Texas statute? That a real law?
Which are not missed, but then at the same time, also removing some more of his thoughtful camera moves, personality, and epic action sequences. The film is safe and rounds off the edges for better or for worse, and frankly, there weren't a ton of edges in the Transformers movies to begin with. Transformers: The Rise of Beasts made $439 million on a budget of around $200 million. This is the lowest amount one of these films have made, being beat out by every Bay film by a solid margin, and was beat by Bumblebee a bit as well. But this movie costed around the same as the Michael Bay films, and a fair bit more than Bumblebee costed. The film might have slightly underperformed due to being in such a packed year in the wake of COVID delays, and audiences seeming a little less interested in this kind of studio film. Note the declining box office of similar franchises like Marvel and the blatant flops from DC, and damn near weekly large releases. It was just too packed of a summer for this movie to really do good. Regardless, last year was kind of an anomaly, with this year seeing a release of a big budget animated prequel in Transformers 1, with some big names working on the project. Weaker box office may not matter that much in the long run, or cause a major restructuring to the film or Transformers universe plan. Transformers 1 is also coming in the wake of an actor and writer's strike, so this may pave the way for it to have less competition. Regardless, the future of this franchise and film will be interesting because the continued relevance of the cartoon and toy line often stems from these films that Michael Bay started back in 2007. So I think Paramount and Hasbro will probably make some adjustments and try to release another one. Rise of Beasts got a Rotten Tomatoes score of 52%, which is the highest mainline Transformers film has ever gotten to since the original release in 2007, which were both far overlapped by Bumblebee, which saw a score of 91%, probably being boosted by following Marvel's formula and sprinkling some John Hughes, creating a safe movie for critics. Notably, Bumblebee got a 66 on Metacritic, while this film got a 42 on Metacritic, meaning while Bumblebee absolutely crushes this film on Rotten Tomatoes, the Metacritic scores are actually in the same ballpark relatively. And really, what a Rotten Tomatoes score is that a large number of critics enjoyed Bumblebee. It was rarely seen as much more than adequate. But despite not a lot of critics disliking Bumblebee, it was rarely seen as much more than just an adequate Transformers movie. Anyway, that was Transformers: Rise of Beasts. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time as I look at the theatrical cut of Josstice League. Or Josstice League, if you want to call it that. I don't really care. Have a good day, guys. And remember...
Statute 2705-3.
What?